I was in a hotel in Chitral in northern Pakistan, and I met two Afghan refugees, and they started telling me about this war that was raging in their country, which was literally just over the next mountain. And they said, you should come and photograph and tell this story because nobody knows about what's happening. There was one man who spoke English. He was a teacher, and he was the one who explained to me that these villages have been destroyed. So we walked for about 4 days up and down these mountains to try and get to this one particular area. Actually, it was this area. And it started out as these kind of farmers and shepherds defending their valley, their tribe, their village. And it seemed like a very noble endeavor. So there was this big meeting. So all these men are getting together and deciding, how are we going to respond? What are we going to do? Should we fight? Should we, how are we going to, what's our strategy?
They got very close to them. If we look at this picture, for example, here they are observing a road.
Yeah.
What are they doing?
Well, there's a convoy of army trucks coming up the trail, which is down in the valley. And this is in kind of on the border of Kunar province and sort of Nuristan. And they would ambush these convoys and steal their guns and whatever material they could get their hands on.
But they totally trusted you. Nobody
Oh, yeah.
cares that you are
No.
there doing your
No, they were extremely hospitable, very friendly, very helpful in terms of helping me to carry equipment or to feed me or to give me a place to sleep. I mean, they really treated me like an honored guest. The end of the first trip, I was able to, when I sent my photographs back, there was a magazine called Gayo from Hamburg, yeah. And they used a couple of my pictures. So I thought this was really the first time I had been published in a major magazine. It was when the Russians invaded in, I would say, December of 1979, just a few days after Christmas. Then it became this big international news story. And suddenly these pictures became, they were being published literally all over the world, all over Europe and the States, everywhere. Yeah, I was in a camp one morning and I heard voices. There was a school, it was a girls' school. So I went over and I walked in and I saw these students sitting on the floor and I asked the teacher, can I photograph? Do you mind if I had the permission from the camp. So I immediately saw this little girl, this Sharbat Gula, with these amazing eyes. And I instantly knew that this was going to make a really powerful portrait. So I just spent the whole time trying to think, how can I convince her, how can I do this? I have like one chance and I don't want her to say no. So I started photographing some of the other students in the class to try and create a situation where she would see that this was okay, there was anything wrong, and that maybe create a bit of fun. I mean, she's an orphan. She was a refugee. She'd had a very difficult life at that point. There's a lot of dirt on her face. You can see this. This is a bit of dirt on the nose. She has a scar. Her shawl is ripped from a fire, which was in the kitchen.
So you were aware from the very first beginning of the importance of this picture?
Well, I had a discussion with the picture editor. The system at the National Geographic was that we select pictures with a picture editor, and then once we've put the selection together, we take that to the editor-in-chief, and then the editor-in-chief looks at the work and decides which pictures he puts in the magazine. And there were two versions of this. There was this version and one of her
where she's a bit covered
with her, yeah. And the picture editor thought that was a better choice because he thought this was too disturbing. He thought this picture was, he said, I don't think people want to keep this on their coffee table for a month because it's like, whoa, this is kind of intense look. But when the editor of the magazine saw this picture, he literally jumped out of his chair and said, "There's our next cover."
And here it is. That's the National Geographic, which has been published.
It brought a lot of attention to Afghan refugees. People came and worked and volunteered in the camps, inspired by this picture.
Then there is this other very impressive portrait of another girl.
I photographed her in 2002. We were actually looking for the Afghan girl. We had gone to try and find the teacher who was in the school the day that I photographed the Afghan girl. And we were literally just walking down the street, and I saw this girl, and she had this incredible look and she had these kind of blue eyes.
It's wonderful, yeah.
And we were in a kind of in a hurry, and I asked the uncle if I could come back in the evening and meet them again and photograph.
Looking at your portraits, you once said that it is worth waiting until the soul of the person being photographed appears.
Yeah, I think it's just trying to find the right moment, the right attitude, the right feeling about the person. Sometimes it can happen very quickly, within just a matter of a few seconds. And this relationship you have with the person, even though it may only last for a minute or 3 minutes or 5 minutes, I really believe that there's that animalistic chemistry that you develop.
And you are close to these people when you photograph them? Or?
I mean, yeah, I want to be right next to them. I want to be very close as I possibly can be. So this particular man is a magician from a nomad tribe called the Rabari people, and they dress and their hair and their beard it's very flamboyant, so that when they go into a village, they can attract a lot of attention, and they want to get a crowd gathered so they can perform and earn some money.
But did he already had contact with Westerners?
Yeah, no, I was with a friend who lived in this area. He knew this man. He invited this man to come and meet me. I always work with a local person because if there's a problem or if somebody wants to talk to me or something, I need somebody who can understand what people are talking about around me. So, because we're walking down the street, I'm photographing, and sometimes you inadvertently might photograph the wrong thing or be in the wrong place, and you need somebody to be there and say, we shouldn't be here. I can hear people talking. Yeah. We've made a mistake or we've done something where we're not. So then we can extract ourselves, leave, or we can apologize or whatever. Or in a more positive way, if I wanted to go into somebody's home or into a shop or talk to somebody and say, I'd like to come back tomorrow and visit with you. Mm-hmm. You can do that if you have a local person. I've always worked with a translator.
Sometimes you have problems if you get too close to people, that they get shy or they say, no, please leave me alone.
I think in most cases, if you treat people in a certain way with respect, they're more than happy to participate in your project and be photographed. It's rare that somebody refuses and doesn't want to participate. This is one of my favorite pictures from India. This was taken in 1984, but it could just as well have been taken 200 years ago. You have this sort of ancient steam locomotive, which no longer exists, juxtaposed with the Taj Mahal, which is probably the most iconic buildings in all of the world. And these workmen moving this locomotive down the track, and it really evokes a feeling of the past. For me, the character, the personality of a place, to be able to show what's unique about this part of what separates India from, say, Europe or Africa or whatever. There was a time when we were all very different. We all had kind of individual cultures. There was a uniqueness to Chinese, the way their architecture and the dress and the food and music, everything else. And you can say that about each country. And I think that that individuality, that distinctive character is what fascinates me. I was just in India 2 days ago, and when the way people dress now is almost exactly the way we dress right here. When I first went to India, there were turbans and certain traditional clothes. The uniqueness is really, I think,
in danger.
And it's a pity because it's fun to have you know, the differences and different sort of yeah.
Anyhow, many of the photographs, they look like everything has been arranged. Is it a lot of effort you need to create these sceneries, or is everything just in front of your lens and you don't have nothing to do?
Well, I think when you're trying to craft a picture, you can. I was wondering before I even arrived at this location, you know, I was wondering if, will the train and the Taj Mahal be in this close proximity so I can get them in the same picture? When I did this story on the train journey across India, almost the first journey was just taking notes. I spent maybe a week or 10 days just being on the train and noting what was interesting in which place. So I wanted to see the whole thing, and then I would say, okay, I need to go to these 12 places in order to show it in the best possible way.
But then you have it in your imagination, you already know a lot about this future picture to come.
Yeah, to me there's two ways of working. One is a picture that you study the schedule of the train to know when it's going to be there, the light, and that there's a lot of preparation. That's kind of one way of working. Another way of working is simply to walk out the door and be open to any eventuality, any serendipitous moment. To me, that's the more enjoyable way of working. Unplanned, unscripted, just kind of go with the flow. There's a touch of humor in the picture.
Absolutely.
Because of there are these very earnest shoppers out there looking completely covered, and yet they have all these kind of modern shoes hanging from this pole. In this part of the world, especially in Afghanistan, particularly in this Pashtun culture, it's completely forbidden to photograph a woman, regardless if they're covered. Even if they're covered from head to toe, you still have no permission. And if a husband or a brother or a relative or even a passerby sees you pointing your camera, it can really be, they could kill you and be within their rights. I think it's always important to treat people with dignity and respect, honor people's culture. But I do think that it's also important to have a record or a memory of how we live, how these people live, how their lives are similar but contrast to ours. So I think that, you know, for me, I think it's justified to take this picture. This is in a mosque in Kabul. And as you can imagine, there's so many widows in Afghanistan because of the men have either been killed or they've left the country to find work. So there's an amazing amount of widows. So they've come to the entrance of the mosque, and she's begging, and there are these passers-by.
Which gives the shadow here.
Yeah, and but it is the graphic quality of this picture, I think, is very strong. You know, the shadows and her hand kind of helping, asking for help, and then this hand and this hand is kind of a interesting, and this very strong shape, and then these lines here and this door.
So this one was exposed on film?
This is in film, yeah, this is Kodachrome.
Generally spoken, this change from analog to digital photograph, what happened for you?
Well, I was kind of hoping that I could finish out my career in using film. And I thought, well, the digital was not so great, the quality. And the whole sort of revolution in technology and the transformation from film, it happened so fast. All the research and development in the camera industry was going all into digital. And it was improving rapidly. Every year it was getting better and better. Whereas today, I think that digital is so far superior to film that I can't even dream of ever taking another picture with film. In the old days, when it got sort of dark, you know, I'd really be the end of the day. But now the cameras are so good and so sensitive that you can work past dark, and you can shoot virtually any time.
And from an aesthetic point of view, do you see is it different than it was before?
I think there's a lot to be said for being able to evaluate the light, the composition, the design instantly, which in film you never knew what you had. There's nothing about film that I'm nostalgic about. The only thing about film which I miss is it was a real thing. You can take those pictures, put them in your drawer, and come back in 20 years, and they're there.
But do you have an archive of hard copies as well to be a little bit protected from these?
Well, that's a very good point. I've always thought that these pictures we take with a digital camera don't exist. They're in a hard drive. They're all X's and O's or whatever, ones and zeros. So they don't really exist. I mean, unless you plug in the hard drive into a computer, and then you see it on a screen. But then it's not like a print that you can put on the wall, or, I mean, that's a real thing. Whereas on a screen, it only exists because of electricity. So I was in the central Rangoon one morning, and I saw these nuns silently walking through the streets in the rain, collecting their food for the day. The system is that the locals give them their rice, and they put it in these bowls as a donation. So I saw these women, and then as I was following them, I saw this incredible old colonial building with the red and the blue, and it just seemed, I thought, this is going to be, the color and the juxtaposition is going to be really strong because of the complementary colors and the reflection on the walkway here.
But this is like a stage you discovered, and then you wait there for minutes or even hours until there are some people, subjects entering.
Yeah, I spent 6 months in Burma on this particular trip. And I probably went out with monks and nuns maybe 20 or 30 times, different places, different occasions. So I would say this picture is a result of hours and days of searching and exploring and trying different things. If you work this situation with a keen eye and patience, and you're intelligent about where you go, and you'll eventually probably get a good picture. This, I think, is just an example of really hard work and spending hours and hours in this kind of situation.
But how do you manage that? At the end, it still looks like a brilliant snapshot. It looks very spontaneous, like.
Well, that's because it is. That's because that's because I found them, I walked with them, and boom, I shot the picture, and there was zero planning that went into this picture. I just happened to be there at that moment, took the picture, and probably the next 5 minutes, I was off somewhere else.
Yeah.
So it's not really luck. It's just perseverance and persistence.
But I think it's very impressive that if you look at the people you are photographing, that it seems as if they are not aware that you are around.
Well, one way is just to photograph when they're not looking at you. Well, in this case, I think I had alerted them. My assistant told them that we were going to be following them. You know, they have this festival every year called Holi, and it's a festival of color. So people get together, and the way they celebrate this festival is they throw color. It could be blue or red or yellow or green, and it's either a powder or it can be a liquid. But after you've gone through this festival, you're completely covered. So after this festival was over, I was walking through the back alleyways of Jodhpur, and this town, the old quarter is all painted blue. So I'm walking through this alleyways, and I noticed all these hands that somebody had made this design. And I just saw it, and I thought, this frame, this design of the hands in the wall could make a really interesting picture. So people were coming and going. There were cows and people coming with things on their head and all sorts of things. And I waited there for maybe 2 hours. Kept shooting and shooting and shooting. And then the next day I went back again for just a few minutes. I think it's a common device to, as you're walking through a town or a village or a city, to suddenly see a scene, kind of a backdrop, and you know that as people, or a dog or a cat or a car or whatever, as they interact with that background, it can help the juxtaposition between the backdrop and the figures interacting or walking or whatever.
Have you found for yourself some like recipes to create an image, like references, for example, to a painting or to other photographs?
For me, I've learned so much from artists about the use of light. You can't underestimate the importance of light and the quality of light in a picture. I think that's one of the great lessons I've learned in my work. For me, I prefer to work in low contrast, muted, cloudy days where there's the highlights and the shadows isn't a great difference. I rarely, almost never, work outside on a sunny day.
Mm-hmm. Natural light in general is extremely important for your work.
Well, yeah, I think it's better to go natural, go the way the light is. As soon as you start to interfere, as soon as you start to light, it looks maybe more managed, looks more, I think people will become aware that there's something something artificial perhaps about the scene. Mm-hmm. The other thing is that it's just easier to work with natural light. Hauling around a bunch of lights and setting up lights is maybe too much work and takes part of the fun out of photography. Kashmir is this, they call it the Switzerland of the Himalayas because of the mountains. And when I got there, I saw all these vendors selling flowers on these boats, and I saw them from the distance, and I thought, that's going to make an amazing picture. I would meet them in the morning at the market, and I would sit in the back of their canoe, and I would travel with them as they sold these flowers and took them to shops and homes and hotels. And I went out maybe 10 times at different, you know. And one day, you know, the light was nice. We were in this sort of canal, and there was this highlight here, and his hand and his paddle fit very well right into that.
Is it another big work to be done in the laboratory once you come back and you refine your pictures?
What we do in the darkroom now or in post-production is pretty much what we used to do in black and white. If this was a black and white picture, we would probably try and open this up, maybe lighten it a bit, and maybe darken some of the water, and try and keep detail in his vest, maybe darken his hat a bit if it's too bright.
A bit more contrast.
And then maybe try and balance the flowers out so that they don't, you know. But that's exactly what we would have done in black and white. You want to draw the eye to certain parts of the picture. And in printing, that's the objective, is to guide the eye and to have a balance between light areas and dark areas.
Many of your pictures look like they were a bit romantic, the way they're constructed, the way they speak to us. Do you believe that it makes us as spectators easier to access these cultures with this embellished world?
Well, you know, I photograph, which is the truest to my gut and to the way I feel I should work. I never intentionally want to embellish anything or make it better than it actually is. I'm just trying to show it for me in the way that tells the best possible story. I don't want to change it for the sake of some criticism or somebody saying, you know, pretending that claiming that I'm kind of beautifying something that shouldn't be beautified, like a refugee camp or some disaster. I mean, I photograph from the heart, and then let the chips fall where they may.